Hello, my name is Nicole and I typically like to do fashion DIYs, but in today's video, I am going to be sharing with you my sewing essentials. Before I get started, I just want to give you a reminder to give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to see more of my fashion DIY content. And let's get into my essentials. So I have had a very on and off again relationship with sewing. So I have accumulated quite a bit of sewing accessories that you don't necessarily need when you're starting out. So for the most part, I'm only going to be speaking about the essentials. And starting with essentials, you are going to need a sewing machine. So I don't necessarily think you need a particularly fancy sewing machine when you're first starting out. This is technically my second sewing machine because the first sewing machine I had kind of broke and I brought it back to my parents' place so my dad could take it somewhere to get it fixed. And in the meantime, I took his sewing machine, which is this heavy duty one. And since then, I just haven't given it back because I like it better than the one that I had before. And mostly because of the heavy duty aspect, specifically because I use a lot of denim when I sew and I would break so many needles. And that's actually how I broke the sewing machine in the first place. So if you're looking into working with heavier materials like wool and denim, I would recommend going for something with a heavy duty option. This one is from Singer and I've been using it for a few years now and I honestly love it. I have no complaints. It's really honestly heavy duty for a domestic. But if you think you're just gonna be sticking with mostly polyesters and cottons and more lightweight fabrics, you definitely don't need the heavy duty aspect, so you can make do with just a regular domestic sewing machine. So I do also own a serger, but that was an investment I didn't make until much later into my sewing career, and it is not something I recommend you getting right off the bat. It is not necessary. You can use your domestic sewing machine to do zigzag stitches to finish edges if that's the look you're going for. There's other ways to work around it. I only really recommend getting the serger if sewing is something you really want to take more seriously, and for myself, I do want to make a majority of my own clothing, and I know if I'm going to be making clothes that I want to last, I want to make sure that the seams are not going to be coming undone as I wear them and wash them, and it just gives it a little bit more of a professional look to it. And sometimes I do sell a few things, so I wouldn't feel comfortable selling something if I didn't have a serger. But if you're just starting out, again, it is so not necessary. Okay, next let's talk about thread. So for thread, I don't recommend going out and necessarily buying a bunch of colors. Maybe stick with the neutrals, maybe black, white, gray, just things that you think you might need. But I wouldn't go out and try to get like a wide variety of colors right away because you have no idea how different one shade of thread is to another, and when you're laying it up to your fabric and trying to thread match, it's just easier to purchase thread as you go per project. So that is just what I'm saying, instead of buying it beforehand and then not being able to use it because you can never find fabric that matches that thread and just it sits there. Just buy thread when you need it, is my opinion. So I typically will just buy these spools of Gutermann thread. I will either get this size or they have like the smaller one, just depending on the project and how much of the thread I think I'm going to need. And as you can tell behind me, I do have larger spools of thread, and this is for my serger. So I just wanted to also point out that if you did want to buy the larger spools of thread and use them with your domestic machine to just like save some money, I guess, on like black and white thread, because that's, you know, buying in bulk. The way you would use it with this machine, you probably could already tell there's like no physical way for me to like attach it to this, but it doesn't work. So what I do as a solution is I just grab a mug or any type of jar that's big enough and have it sit in there. Make sure it can like spin freely like this, and then you just thread your machine as normal, and it's honestly perfect. I use this all the time when I'm working with white and black thread because I obviously run out of them a lot more often on the smaller spools. So that's just a little thread hack, I guess. Okay, so still talking thread, we are gonna talk about bobbins. So I recommend buying at least a dozen bobbins. That way you can have multiple of these thread at a time and you don't have to worry about not having a matching bobbin thread. So I recommend getting a large quantity of them when you first start out so you don't have to keep unwinding and rewinding them. And you will also notice that they come either metal or sometimes they come plastic. That really just depends on the make of your machine. I use a Singer, so that is why I have to use the metal ones. They go in the Singer machines. Okay, so let's talk about measuring tools. I honestly think the more measuring tools, the better. I honestly, for some projects, I use like 4 measuring tools. I don't even know why. You honestly only need 1, but I am gonna show you my top 2 favorite options. So the first one is your good old-fashioned tape measure. Make sure to have one that's inches and centimeters. It just saves you a lot of time sometimes, especially if you're following tutorials and they're working in inches and you're working in centimeters or vice versa. It's just nice to have both. So I would recommend a good old-fashioned measuring tape. This can honestly be your one and only measuring tool if you only choose to get one. But if you are gonna get another one, I also like the seam gauge. So the seam gauge is honestly the most handy when you're working with hems. They're very inexpensive. I think they're like under $5. Essentially, this little guy slides up and down and you can choose wherever you want your seam to be. So you know if you're doing a hem, you want a 1-inch hem, you just fold it up and measure it with this. So it just makes it a little quicker and a little easier. As a beginner, you definitely want to make sure your hem lines are even. So this will help you with that. Okay, next up are your fabric scissors, and these are extremely important. You are definitely going to want to invest a little bit of money into your fabric scissors because nothing is more frustrating than cutting into your fabric and it going nowhere. Like, nothing. I can't describe. And then it's all jaggedy and it looks like crap and then you're just like, So to avoid that, get yourself a good pair of fabric scissors. I've honestly had these guys for like maybe 3 years. They're still going strong. I don't think they were super expensive. I think they were like $30, $35. I got them at Fabricland. Nothing extremely exciting about them, but they've honestly been really good, and that really comes with taking care of them. You're going to want to really make sure you do not mix these up for paper scissors. Never use your fabric scissors on paper. It will dull them and you will be having to buy a new pair of fabric scissors sooner than you realize. So that is my tip and advice. If you are the type of person who prefers a rotary blade, which I do have hanging over here, I do see some people prefer rotary blade versus scissors. Personally, I prefer scissors. I just find I have better control, and I find with the rotary blade that my pressure isn't consistent, so it's not like a clean cut and I have to go back and then it looks messy. So if you have really good control and you prefer a rotary blade, then they are really handy sometimes, but not something that you definitely need to get, and I would stick with fabric scissors if you had to choose. Next up, you are definitely going to want to get yourself some pins because you can't get through any project without them. And this isn't necessarily a necessity, but I do really recommend that if you are going to invest in pins, then you should invest in some sort of pin cushion, pin pad, pin magnet. So I actually just have this little magnetized guy. I find it super handy, especially if it falls on the floor. I can just kind of like wave this around and it'll pick up all of the loose pins that I have dropped. I also find it like low-key hilarious how all of my sewing accessories are primary color. I actually bought this like easily 10 years ago, long before my primary color obsession, and same with the scissors. Like, I got this before I was crazy about primary colors, and here I am. It's like I always knew. Anyways, I also recommend picking up some safety pins. These are really handy when you're working with any type of strap. Also, if you're like pinning stuff onto yourself to try to like size it, you kind of want to have something that's not going to stab you. So I recommend safety pins, and you can pick these up at the dollar store. They're very inexpensive, so I recommend getting that as well. Also, when you're out there picking up your pins, don't forget to grab yourself a few hand needles. These are really gonna come in handy when you're doing buttons or any awkward seam that you really can't get to with your machine. I always bust out my little hand needle and just do it by hand. They range in a variety of thicknesses based off of what type of fabric you're working with. So if you're working with a thinner fabric, you're gonna wanna use a smaller needle, and if you're working with a thicker fabric, you're gonna wanna use a larger needle. And then there's embroidery needles, which are just like bigger ones, I'm pretty sure, I don't know. Anyways, so just a couple hand needles is all you need. I'm gonna actually coin this as the most important tool you are going to need, and it is a good seam ripper, because this thing is going to come in handy all the time. You are going to be grabbing for it all the time. I bought myself one that had like a little bit bigger of a handle, so it was like more comfortable to hold and maneuver. Lifesaver, honestly. The amount of times I've had to turn to this tool. You need, everyone needs. Another thing I would recommend, it's not necessarily a necessity, but it definitely does come in handy, and I think it's only like $1, and that is fabric chalk or tailor's chalk. I'm not sure which is the correct term. I have yellow and white. I would honestly just recommend sticking with white. I have heard, and I have also experienced, that sometimes the yellow and the colored chalks, as fun and pretty as they are, they do stain, and the white does not. So get white, and this stuff really comes in handy when you're trying to fit things on yourself and you need to mark how much you need to take it in, and you can just mark it with your chalk and know exactly where you need to sew. So chalk it is. So hopefully most of you guys already have one of these at home. I just want to bring it to your attention because it is something that I find a necessity when sewing, and that is an iron. So I've actually had this beauty since I first went into university. I remember my mom and I went out and got me like a bunch of different things she thought I would need as an adult, and an iron was one of them. And I kid you not, I didn't bust this thing out of the box until I started sewing, but I do really recommend an iron. Nothing is more frustrating than working with crinkly or wrinkled fabric. Now that I press all my seams, I can't go back to not pressing all my seams. So I really recommend getting yourself an iron. So naturally, if you're using an iron, you are going to need an ironing board. And I actually use this little mini guy. I bought it again when I went to university and thought this would be the best option for space. And it really is the best option for space. I can't imagine having a full-size iron in my apartment. It just like, I don't know where I'd put it. That is why I do like this little mini guy, but I will say that sometimes it's really frustrating to get into smaller spaces like sleeves, because it's quite a wide opening here. It's not narrow, so it's not the best for that. As long as you have an ironing board of some sort, you're doing okay. Okay, so I'm only adding this thing in here because it's one of those things that you don't really need until you need it, which is a loop turner. So there are other ways that you can turn your loops, and you can Google them if you don't want to purchase one of these, but for me, I kind of like the loop turner. I have the most success with it. All the other methods sometimes work, sometimes don't. And this has been the most consistent thing for me. So essentially, if you have any type of strap like this, you're gonna wanna put it through this to turn it right side out. And keep in mind, there are also different lengths of loop turners. So depending on the size and thickness, you might wanna get a different size based off of what you normally would be using it for. But I just have this little guy, and it has done the job pretty well, I would say. Okay, so the only reason why I'm adding this part in here is because I do dabble in pattern drafting when I am making my projects, and there are a few things that if you want to do that yourself that I really recommend you investing in. So I just kind of want to throw those into the mix. First step is going to be any type of pattern drafting paper. I just have this roll of basically tracing paper. I purchased it off of Amazon. It is classified as pattern drafting paper. You can get some with like a grid in it and measurements if you really want, but for what I do, this is fine. And I've honestly had this for years, and it's still going strong. And honestly, if you just have tracing paper or even like maybe parchment paper in your kitchen, you could probably use that as well. But anything that's like equivalent to this is gonna be just fine. Okay, so the next thing you're gonna wanna get for pattern drafting is rulers. I really like these rulers because they have all the measurements broken down on them, and it's really easy to visually see what is going on. And I also like that they are clear because I can also see my pattern underneath it and what's going on, and I know I'm drawing in the right spot as opposed to using a plastic opaque ruler or a metal ruler. That is why I prefer the particular pattern drafting rulers. But if you obviously have just like a regular ruler at home, that'll be just fine. You don't need to invest in something new. But if you were looking for something that would make it a little bit easier in the drawing process, this would definitely help. But I do really recommend getting this next ruler, which is a S-curve. So this is the best thing when you are drawing out necklines, any type of curve in your pattern at all. This is gonna help you make sure that it is a clean, consistent line and it matches up with everything. If you're gonna invest in anything of the 3 items I showed you for pattern drafting, get the curved ruler. It is really going to make your life so much easier when you are drawing. I think I pretty much covered everything. Anything else obviously isn't essential because it's not coming to top of mind. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video somewhat helpful, and hopefully I didn't ramble on for too long because I feel like I've been recording for a while now. But please be sure to subscribe and comment down below and let me know what your top sewing essential items are, and let me know if I missed anything because I'm sure I did. Anyways, I'll see you next time. Bye guys.